extremely diverse type of rock music started in the very late 60s and the early 70s by, it's commonly debated as to whether Led Zeppelin were the first ever metal band or Black Sabbath. Led Zeppelin took more of a hard rock approach, whereas Black Sabbath were much darker. And for a while, these were the only two kinds of heavy metal for the first few years until around 1975, when bands like Motorhead started to form and make it louder, faster, things like that. The guitarist Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath, he used a very dark tone, playing very slowly, but also incorporated blues and jazz into his solos to build a new genre and give music a whole new feel. And it really did spark off hundreds of subgenres, if not thousands. Today there are subgenres of heavy metal such as pirate metal, black metal, death metal, things such as that. All coming from just the initial idea of heavily distorted guitars. It works either way. There can be extremely slow drum beats or extremely fast drum beats, as well as the bass. And it can either be extremely simple with just one rhythm guitar, with screamed vocals, but also extremely intricate, which is why it's such a diverse genre. Some of the more successful metal bands, such as Metallica, the lead guitarist Kirk Hammett sticks almost solely to a minor pentatonic scale, aided by a wah pedal, in almost every solo he plays. In the rhythm of not just Metallica, but a large portion of metal bands, triplets are used a lot in rhythm, in the guitar playing as well as the bass. And then alongside Metallica, featuring ex-Metallica bassist bands such as Megadeth, with guitarist Marty Friedman, he developed the ideas even further and incorporated Eastern guitar playing into heavy metal. He was one of the first guitarists to do so, using Arabic scales in their songs, things such as that. It will typically be very loud, very distorted. Guitar brands such as Gibson and ESP, Ibanez, to give a very powerful tone, very dark, very bassy, very punchy. And it will traditionally be about darker subjects, common subjects in heavy metal, death, drug abuse, things such as that, which reflects in the guitar playing. Another component in heavy metal music is the double bass pedal for drums. In the 80s, speed metal was invented, the next subgenre to take off massively, which was a culmination of bands such as Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, Exodus, where the youth of the time would get together in clubs in all over America and just want to listen to fast, heavy music. And to make it even faster, the double bass pedal was invented for drums, which enabled drummers to keep a faster beat and keep up with the guitars, and which allowed solos to appear even faster. Other techniques commonly used will be pinch harmonics, and tapping, triplets, many different things to build up to what is now known as heavy metal soloing and heavy metal music in general. In the 90s, heavy metal music had just started to die out, and was soon replaced by grunge music, which took heavy influences from punk and early on metal as well, where guitars would be, the music in general would be much simpler, much less intricate, and guitar, very commonly what is known as the anti-solo. If there were solos in songs, they would very, very commonly follow the melody of the vocal in a chorus or a verse, as displayed in possibly the most well-known grunge song of all time, Smells Like Teen Spirit, where the guitar solo matches exactly the melody of the vocal in the verse and pre-chorus. Moving on from that, the guitars started to become more, it became more common for two guitars to be involved, as genres such as Riot Girl came into play, and it would be extremely common for one guitar to be playing a chord progression, almost exclusively power chords, with being 3-4 chords in a chord progression throughout the whole song. Bands such as L7, Hole, who heavily inspired by Nirvana, and other bands of the time, where a rhythm guitar would be keeping the chord progression going, and there would be very, very simple little riffs being played over the rhythm guitar, and it would be very relaxed. It would be a laid back attitude. Vocals were very rarely screamed at you until the music started to pick up, which then later on became even more relaxed. And around the time that Britpop started to become huge, bands like Oasis releasing platinum albums, albums that went platinum almost instantly, had a heavy influence all around the world, even on artists of the time that were playing grunge music and alternative music. And as it got to about 1994, 95, bands would play a lot more acoustic songs, even with bands such as Nirvana again and Alice in Chains playing much more acoustic. Alice in Chains went straight from having a very dark, partially metal inspired, from bands such as Black Sabbath, with how dark they were. They went straight on to recording an EP named Jar of Flies, which is, the drums are intricate but laid back, and the guitars are acoustic with overdubbed electric guitars every now and then, but the focus was acoustic guitars. The genre as a whole was extremely close to punk in how simple the music was. It would usually follow the same chord progression running through the song, very simple structures. Just as an example, would be like verse, chorus, solo, chorus, sometimes involving a bridge, and not even always including a solo. Guitars would typically be very distorted until it started to get into the later 90s, where the Britpop influence came in and acoustic guitars were more commonly used. Country music first became popularized in Southern America. It had its roots in folk music, and blues is extremely commonly involved in country music. Initially, it would just be acoustic guitars and vocals, and the lyrics would almost exclusively focus around personal troubles, and they would tell a story, with lyrics very often being spoken instead of sung. The instruments involved would be acoustic guitars with double basses, and one thing that was extremely frowned upon to begin with were drum kits. Many country musicians deemed them to be too loud and unpure, because you can't, well, in their view, you can't express emotion from a drum kit. And that is what country music is about to a lot of country musicians. It's about expressing your feelings through your music, through your guitar, and through your songwriting. So what quite a few artists did, including most notably Johnny Cash in songs such as Walk the Line, they would slip a piece of paper or a piece of material under the strings and strum the guitar, and it would make a snare-like sound. And as time went on, things such as electric guitars were invented, electric basses. Drum kits became much more common in country music. The drums would very rarely take precedence, if ever, especially in early music. But they would do what's called a snare train, running the whole way through the song, just to keep a beat, and just to add something else to the song. Notable musicians include Johnny Cash, and more commonly, modernly, country music has been tied in with pop music as well, with artists like Taylor Swift selling massive amounts of records. As time's gone on, it's become more commercialised and more pop, in Taylor Swift's case anyway. But the country element is still there, and her roots are in country music. Other notable musicians include Willie Nelson, who has recorded tens of albums, and over the years he's never really stopped going. The British invasion, where the Beatles and the Rolling Stones just took over the world with their music, had a big effect on country music. As it came into the 60s, people started to love rock and roll again, the early forms of rock and roll. And this hit country in a way that it had to adapt to survive. It wasn't just about a man or a woman with a guitar expressing their feelings, talking about their woes, things like that. And country started to take a bit more of a rock approach. And bands that were already rock and roll bands, such as the Rolling Stones, had massive hits with songs such as Honky Tonk Woman, which incorporated country in the songs. And then many other bands followed suit, and this eventually became followed onto genres such as southern rock, hard rock, and even more notable bands in the Common era, bands such as Black Stone Cherry. They are a classic hard rock band from Southern America, but they still have their roots in country music, with acoustic ballads where they sing about troubles in their life. Some of the techniques commonly used in country music on guitar, first of all, in the early years, would be slipping a piece of paper or material under the strings, as I said before, to create a snare-like sound. Hybrid picking is commonly used, where you use both a guitar pick and a finger to pick two notes at the exact same time. Finger picking is commonly used, especially on instruments such as banjos, where songs are played faster, have more of a Southern American country feel to them. What are known as cowboy chords, just basic chords, be played on guitar, strummed slowly, following the same progressions. In the late 80s and early 90s, clubs in America, the youth of America would be going to small clubs to see a genre that was known as pop punk. And for a while it was kept underground before being taken onto the mainstream as you came into the early to mid 90s. Most pop punk bands would refuse to sign on to major labels and things because they didn't want their music to be frowned upon from their underground roots. Bands such as NoFX have never signed on to a major label but are still massively successful around the world. One of the major leaders in pop punk music are Green Day, who in 1994 released Dookie, which inspired many other bands to follow suit and sign on to major labels, release very simple songs. The guitar playing follows on from the alternative scene in the 90s, and from taking its roots from punk, being called pop punk. It's extremely common to have simple solos and songs with 3-4 chords in through the whole song. It resonated with the youth because it was being played by the youth, and it inspired many more people to pick up guitars and basses and drums because the music was a lot easier to learn. Within a few months you'd be able to play your favourite band songs. Some of the other techniques they use are octaves, where you'd play a power chord as you usually would, but missing out the middle note, so that you have, say, an A, and then you'd have an octave higher than the A, without having the note in the middle. Another technique they commonly use is to have a very simple riff running through the whole song, or at major parts of the song, with bands like Blink-182, massive hits like the song Damn It, where there's just one guitar part, it plays a main riff, and then it just swaps between this riff and a chord progression. They'll very commonly stick to the minor pentatonic scales and the cage system, where they will just keep a simple riff going with either a chord progression being played after or over the top of it. It's a very simple genre, but that's not how it started. Before pop punk was a major genre, there would be complicated or intricate blues solos placed into songs. In the very early Green Day recordings, in songs such as The Judge's Daughter, there were very fast blues solos, and the same on the whole album. But as it became more mainstream and started to take off, everything was stripped back and just made more raw, with very simple chord progressions just being played over and over. Modern pop punk has really split in two directions. On one side, you have bands such as All Time Low and You Me at 6, who have gone closer to the pop side of pop punk, with very commercialised music, heavily auto-tuned vocals, and with now more intricate guitar parts, but still sticking with the simple rhythm, and adding in much more difficult and intricate lead guitar parts over the top. The other side of modern pop punk, bands such as A Day to Remember and 4 Years Strong, have made the music heavier. They've incorporated a music style known as hardcore, and the guitars will be very commonly down-tuned and drop-tuned for what's known as a breakdown, where it will just be a rhythm, the drums keeping a slow beat with the bass drum, and very commonly a double bass pedal or 2 bass drums will follow the rhythm of the bass and the guitar parts as well. This will very commonly be just 1 or 2 chords with like an open chord, for example, just going from a D to an E to an F, just repeatedly. And this can either be in like very fast or very slow.